I was reading the gospel reading for the day, as we do as a family every morning as part of our morning prayers. And something jumped out at me that I wanted to just jump down here really quick and make a quick video about, because something occurred to me that hasn't in the past, because Jesus uses a lot of figurative language in his teaching. And this is something that can be kind of contentious for Protestants and Catholics, because Catholics take his teachings about being the bread of life very literally, obviously, right? But a lot of Protestants will often reply to that and say, well, there's a lot of other places where he refers to himself as inanimate things that we don't take literally. So why in this case do you take it literally? And he does that in this morning's reading. It was in the Gospel of John, John chapter 8. I'll read it really quick here and then offer some thoughts on it. He says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Okay, there you go. So he's obviously not saying he's literally a light, right? He's using metaphorical language to say that he is a guide and that his teachings are a guide for us to help us journey in this pilgrimage of life so that we can find our way. And in another spot in John chapter 15, he says, "I am the vine and you are the branches, and if you remain in me, you will bear much fruit." And then carries on. And obviously he's not saying, I'm literally a vine and you are literally the branches that are going to flow out from me. He's saying that, no, I am the source of life, and all the good that you want to do in this life, you will have to rely and cling to me and remain in me in order to have that kind of flourishing and that vitality. But one thing that stands out to me about these verses is that he makes these analogies, he uses this metaphorical language, and then he quickly moves on. Let's look again really quickly at John chapter 8. He says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." So the Pharisees said to him, "You testify on your own behalf," and they carry on with this interaction, right? He uses this metaphor very sort of abruptly as part of his teaching sequence, and then he moves on. And he does the same thing in John chapter 15. But in John chapter 6, this whole bread of life narrative, he doesn't do that. He doesn't simply say, "I am the bread of life. Whoever partakes of this bread will have eternal life." He dwells on it. He spends a lot of time elaborating specifically and precisely what he means. And if he did it in the same way with this "I am the light of the world" narrative, it would be something more like if he said, "I am the light of the world, and whoever follows me will not walk in darkness." Now, here's specific instruction about how to use me as a light. As it turns out, my eyeballs are bioluminescent. You're going to have to somehow extract them out and use them in a very specific way to light the path as you walk at nighttime. He doesn't do that, because as soon as someone were to start to describe the metaphor in those terms, everybody listening would be like, I think he's literally saying that his body can be used as a source of light. And at that point, they would have to confront the fact that everything that they thought he had said, which sounded like wisdom in the past, may have just been the ramblings of a madman. And the same thing with the vine narrative in John chapter 15. He doesn't say, "I'm the vine and you are the branches." And as it turns out, these branches will grow fruit out of my armpits. There will be grapes, and you have to harvest them in a very specific way. Otherwise, these fine grapes will not be used properly. Like he doesn't start to use this literal language to expand on the metaphor. So in John chapter 6, starting in verse 35, he does something very similar to these other two analogies. He starts with, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." Okay, great. So we get it. So you're this source of life that is going to nourish us and sustain us and provide for us as we go through the spiritual life, and as we struggle in this life, you will be this sort of refuge that will strengthen us as we go. But the problem with John chapter 6, and what makes it different from all of these other examples, is that he doesn't stop there. So if you jump down to verse 51, he goes, "I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever." It's like, okay, yeah, so you're just reiterating the analogy. But then he goes, "And the bread that I will give you for the life of the world is my flesh," which is really escalating that metaphorical language. It's like, okay, now you're comparing it. It's what is so the bread isn't an analogous to something else, something spiritual that will nourish us. You've just tied it to something very quite literal, which is your flesh. You're saying we need to eat your flesh, your body. And the very next verse, the Jews that were listening to him ask this very question. They have the exact kind of reaction that they would have had he said, I'm the light of the world and my eyeballs are bioluminescent and you need to use them in a very specific way. They'd be like, how are we supposed to use your eyeballs? What are you talking about? They say in verse 52 in John chapter 6, it says they disputed among themselves and they said, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? Okay, fine, the metaphor was fine. We were okay with you until now you've just tied it to a very literal thing. And then Jesus replies, escalating the language to be very literal at this point. In verse 53, he says, very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood have eternal life, and I will raise them up on the last day. The metaphor is gone at this point. He's not talking about some metaphorical bread. He's literally saying, you need to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And the people who are listening to this are like, they're having the kind of reaction that they would have if these light of the world and I am the vine and you are the branches analogies in metaphorical language had been expanded to become very literal. They would have been like, okay, you're crazy. And that's precisely the reaction that a lot of them have. In John chapter 6, verse 66, it sort of ends in a certain way for many of the people that had been following him. It says, because of this, many of his disciples, and we're not just talking about the crowd that tends to congregate around him, we're saying his disciples turned back and no longer went about with him. This is an exclamation of the fact that they were listening to this and they were taking it literally. They didn't have this kind of reaction when he referred to himself as the light of the world or the vine and they the branches. They were like, okay, yeah, we get it. This is a metaphor. But what happens in John chapter 6 could have been at first received as a metaphor, and they probably did until Jesus said very explicitly, no, it's not a metaphor. You have to eat my body and drink my blood. And they're like, okay, we're out. That's a bridge too far. And as a closing remark here really quickly, if I can put my tinfoil hat on for a second, I've always thought it really compelling. Some people don't make a big deal about this, and maybe I shouldn't make a big deal out of it, but I've always found it really interesting that John chapter 6, verse 66 describes his disciples leaving him at this crucial moment within the litany or the array of his teachings, specifically about the Eucharist, about communion, about receiving him body, blood, soul, and divinity, is the point of departure. Now, this is the Gospel of John. This is the same John who wrote the book of Revelation, who said that the mark of the beast is a number and it's 666. Now, I don't insist upon this, but I do think it's really interesting that in his own book, his own Gospel, John 666, is the point at which there is this departure, there's this turning away from Jesus, and it's specifically over this teaching that the mark of the beast, the mark of the Antichrist, is those who will reject this teaching and perhaps instantiate some sort of alternative teaching, theology, or maybe even a church that rejects specifically this teaching of the Eucharist. So maybe that's a coincidence, maybe not. I've always found that to be kind of interesting and at least something maybe worth reflecting on, especially the way that Jesus ties this teaching to eternal life, that unless you eat my body and blood, you will not have eternal life. That seems to be a crucial element within salvation and within what it means to be a true disciple of Jesus. Thank you so much for watching that. If that was interesting to you and you want to try to help support the work, the first thing that you can do is subscribe and like this video. That's always a big help, and maybe share it on your social networks. Another thing you can do is take a look at my website, brianholdsworth.ca. There are lots of opportunities to support me there. You can donate, you can join my reinforcements community. That's a big help. And another thing is to look at some of the sponsors of my channel. A sponsor I want to tell you about really quick is realestateforlife.org. They are a network of real estate agents who are pro-life and faith-based, and they will help you get connected to a real estate agent who shares your values and your priorities as you try to settle and find a home. So if you're looking to invest or buy a new home or move, check out realestateforlife.org, and they will connect you to a real estate agent who will partner with you in that vital way.
Pray, brethren, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God the Almighty.